I now look to Sara Dubé, librarian-elect, St Hugh's College, to open the case for the opposition.
I remember the first time I saw Midnight in Paris. This is one of my favorite movies. It teaches us the importance of art and the magic of cinema. But did my viewing of it change when I read about the sexual assault allegations against Woody Allen, its director? Is it fair for me to separate the two? Or is this taking an easy way out, as the proposition may argue, in trying to continue to appreciate the art while ignoring the moral consequences of doing so, particularly in the age of Me Too? The main question that we're dealing with here tonight is not what our response to the immoral artists should be. I want to be very clear that they do deserve punishment and that this isn't up for debate tonight. But what we are asking is whether our response to the artwork of people who have committed morally abhorrent acts should change in light of their behavior. I want to start by looking at what we mean by separating the art from the artist. This debate should not be characterized as the proposition equaling not supporting the work of artists and not giving them money, and the opposition equaling supporting them and paying them money for their work. You can still buy a movie or a painting or a song created by someone who's morally corrupt and have their actions influence your interpretation of their work. This is not separating the art from the artist, but still supporting their work. And equally, you can condemn an artist for their actions and hold that they should be punished, but still acknowledge that you can appreciate their art as something meaningful in itself and as something separate from the artist's unrelated behavior. It is naive to conflate the art with the artist in the manner proposed by the proposition tonight. We do not live in a black and white world. You can be a bad person and still create art that's important. Before I go on, I just want to address some of the points raised by Amelia in her speech. She mentioned the importance of teaching the moral aspects of an artist's life when you learn about their art itself. And I agree with that. I actually agree with a lot of the points that she said in her speech. I think it's important to learn about the past of an artist, but I think it's equally important to have the capacity to judge art and the artist separately, and to be able to make a distinction between the two. She also talked about Lord of the Flies and how we have a moral obligation to recognize Golding's wrongdoings. Again, I agree with this. We should condemn him for what he's done, and he should be punished and judged for that in society. But his book, Lord of the Flies, should not be colored and judged by his unrelated actions. And finally, you also mentioned how Kevin Spacey's career came to a halt. I'll address this later in my speech in talking about how it is important to punish a morally corrupt artist and how this does not actually have to color our appreciation of their art. But before I go on, it falls upon me to introduce the proposition in tonight's debate. You've just heard from Amelia Harvey, a first-year student of applied linguistics at Kellogg and one of the access officers at the Union. So I actually had the same thing to say about Amelia as she did about Beth, that she's just too nice to make a joke about. And I guess that's a first in a debate with 3 union committee members on it. Speaking second is Rachel Krangle, who organized the 2017 Women's March in London and who's an active campaigner for women's rights. And closing the case for the proposition tonight is Oshrat Kotler, who sparked Israel's Me Too movement after speaking out on live television about sexual misconduct. It is a privilege to be joined by you all tonight. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. I think that people often view this debate as asking whether the art can be judged independently from the artist. But an equally important consideration is whether the artist should be judged independently from their art. And the answer to this is yes. If the artist has done something horrible, they should be punished for it without question, and not their art. They should be punished going forward in refusing to give them work, but not indirectly by judging their art based on their unrelated behavior. Because the art isn't the issue here, the actions of the artist are, and therefore our response should be directed at their actions and at the artist, but not at their work. The proposition may argue tonight that with the rise in people feeling a responsibility to buy ethically made food and clothes, for instance, the same principle should apply to art. But even if we accept this argument, it misses the intent behind responsible consumerism. Because we don't just buy ethically made food and clothes for the sake of doing so. The intent behind this is to stop the flow of revenue to unethically sourced products, thereby shutting down these businesses and encouraging ethical production practices. I completely support this intent, but its implementation within the arts industry is slightly different. If we accept the starting goal as encouraging ethical production practices, clearly the best way to achieve this aim is to just condemn the artists themselves. This means firing them, as was done with Weinstein, refusing to work with them, as Gal Gadot did with Brett Ratner, or even refusing to buy work which, when purchased, gives money directly to the immoral artist. This creates enough societal backlash to provide a rational, self-serving interest to engage in ethical practices, as it sadly seems like a moral one is sometimes not enough. Coloring our response to their artwork just completely misses the point here. The argument that supporting the work of immoral artists legitimizes their actions is spurious. If the artist has committed a crime, they should face the consequences for this crime. And I'm sure that getting fired and not being able to find a job anymore sends quite a clear message that their actions are not legitimate or acceptable. Making the focus of this debate the art is hiding from the real issue. The focus should be the artist. Think of how you would react to emotion like, this house cannot separate the product from the designer. So imagine if a software designer at Apple made an incredible iOS update, but was then accused of sexual harassment by multiple women and found guilty. Should he be fired and face the legal consequences of his behavior? Yes, without question. Should this negatively impact his ability to find a job in the future? Yes, without a doubt. But should it affect our usage of his update if it's something that's genuinely beneficial? No, because his work and his actions are separate. So let's apply this similar line of reasoning to the distinction between the art and the artist. Let's specifically look at the case of Roman Polanski. He was charged with raping a 13-year-old girl. That this is unforgivable is not up for debate tonight. In 2018, in the context of the Me Too movement, the Academy expelled Polanski from its membership because of this case, as well as other allegations of child sexual abuse. This is an appropriate response to take in light of his actions. That is a direct result of his unacceptable behavior, but that is unrelated to his art. Again, this is not up for debate tonight. What we are debating is what our response to Polanski's movies, such as The Pianist, should be in light of his behavior. The Pianist is one of the most poignant movies on the Holocaust that I've seen, with its expression of the complexity of humanity with kindness within inhumanity, beauty amidst war, and friendship within conflict. Yes, it was directed by Polanski. And yes, of course, Polanski should be punished for his behavior. But the merits of the movie itself should be judged independently from its director's actions, because the movie is something bigger and more powerful than just its director. The art itself is separate from the artist. And more importantly, Polanski should be judged independently of his work. So should an artist be judged for their personal actions outside of their work? Yes, absolutely. But should art be judged based off of its artist's personal actions? Absolutely not. This debate is not about whether we can reconcile aesthetic pleasure and moral disgust. The two can coexist once we understand that they're directed at two different things. The former is towards the art itself, but the latter is towards the artist. Before I finish, I just want to take a moment to look at why we enjoy art. It is something that provokes an emotional, not a rational response within us. It is something that moves us, and that may even change the way in which we perceive the world. And it is something that each person interprets differently. Expressing our love for a song or a movie created by someone who has committed a crime should not be greeted with moral outrage. Our emotional response to art and our emotional response to the actions of the artist should not spill over into what should be a rational response in condemning the artist without condemning their art. We should not hide a fear of standing up directly to the artist under the guise of morality, because it isn't immoral to enjoy a beautiful piece of art because of the horrible actions of the artist. And it isn't immoral to love something that moves you when you have already condemned the person who created it for their actions. This isn't taking an easy way out of the problem. It is taking the problem head on. It is punishing the artist without hiding behind changing our reaction to their artwork instead. I mentioned Midnight in Paris at the start of this speech. In the movie, the character of Ernest Hemingway says, "I believe a love that is true and real creates a respite from death." Like love, art is something that transcends, but the artist is separate from this transcendence. When we feel something for a piece of art, it leaves the artist and it becomes a part of us, and we can't change the way that we feel about it because of its director's unrelated actions. Because it no longer belongs to the artist, but rather to us. Not only can we separate the art from the artist, we can't not do so if we want to retain its unique position in society as something that transcends human interactions and politics. Once created, art is something that is up to us to interpret, to appreciate, and to love, and it's no longer defined by the artist. And once having created the artist is no longer defined by it. We must recognize that we can separate the two, and that we can still love a piece of art while also condemning the person who created it. Thank you.